voice in my head tells me I should believe in God. The voice in my head tells me to obey the law. The voice in my head tells me to take care of my children. The voice in my head tells me to eat well. The voice in my head tells me to brush my teeth before I go to bed. The voice in my head tells me my childhood will return someday. The voice in my head tells me to tell the truth. The voice in my head tells me religion is illogical. The voice in my head tells me to treat everyone with respect. The voice in my head tells me to stand up straight. The voice in my head tells me to drive safely. The voice in my head tells me to find a way to be accommodating. The voice in my head tells me to be afraid of death. The voice in my head tells me to cherish life. The voice in my head tells me to leave things the way I found them. The voice in my head tells me when lying is necessary. The voice in my head tells me I'm entitled to as much as the next guy. The voice in my head tells me life ain't fair. The voice in my head tells me anger is easy. The voice in my head tells me my penis should be larger. The voice in my head tells me I don't look as old as I am. The voice in my head tells me that sobriety is overrated. The voice in my head tells me that everything is going to be all right. The voice in my head tells me I've seen everything. The voice in my head tells me I ain't seen nothing yet. The voice in my head tells me true love is a fallacy. The voice in my head tells me my mother is not dead. The voice in my head tells me there is nothing on the other side. The voice in my head tells me to smile at strangers. The voice in my head tells me I have sinned. The voice in my head tells me I have free will. The voice in my head tells me one day I will be happy. The voice in my head tells me to vote. The voice in my head tells me to give the pregnant homeless woman $1. The voice in my head tells me to run a red light. The voice in my head tells me not to shake hands if I don't feel like it. The voice in my head tells me there is someone else to blame. The voice in my head tells me I'm in control of my life. The voice in my head tells me people are dangerous. The voice in my head tells me I am a success. The voice in my head tells me I'm a failure. The voice in my head tells me to turn off the lights when I leave a room. The voice in my head tells me I am sexy. The voice in my head tells me there is always a tomorrow. The voice in my head tells me I own too many shirts. The voice in my head tells me the police are people too. The voice in my head tells me I could die today. The voice in my head tells me I could die tomorrow. The voice in my head tells me money won't make me happy. The voice in my head tells me to spend my last dollar. The voice in my head tells me I don't know what I don't know. The voice in my head tells me not to get another tattoo. The voice in my head tells me black don't crack. The voice in my head tells me to grow up. The voice in my head tells me my stomach should be flat. The voice in my head tells me nobody knows what I'm thinking. The voice in my head tells me I don't want the responsibility. The voice in my head tells me I am Spartacus. The voice in my head tells me the world will change when I die. The voice in my head tells me politicians are professional liars. The voice in my head tells me I need more time. The voice in my head tells me not to let on when I am jealous. The voice in my head tells me they are wrong. The voice in my head tells me my mechanic is not 100% honest. The voice in my head tells me I blew it. The voice in my head tells me the 80s are still going on somewhere. The voice in my head tells me I should have made it by now. The voice in my head tells me white people are everywhere. The voice in my head tells me not to take things personally. The voice in my head tells me nobody gets me. The voice in my head tells me everything is really about me. The voice in my head tells me to start smoking again. The voice in my head tells me The voice in my head tells me to listen to others. The voice in my head tells me to get serious for a minute. My head tells me we are in trouble. The voice in my head tells me when to